Hi, everyone. Since it is shortly afternoon and we have sort of a good group here in the meeting, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Lacey. I'm CAM's Administrative and Program Coordinator. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you to Doug and Randy for joining us today for this program. I'm just going to give a couple of housekeeping notes. This program is being recorded. And if you have any questions or technical issues, feel free to message me in the chat box or send me an email at admin@calmuseums.org, and I'll do my best to address your question. Now I'm going to pass it off to the chair of CAM's program committee, Tomoko Kuta, who will introduce today's program. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that, I was muted. Lacey, thank you so much for all your support of the ReMuseum series, and it's great to see everybody here today. Before we get started, I'd just like to read a land acknowledgement. As we begin this event, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our various regions. A land acknowledgement is a critical step towards working with Native communities to secure meaningful partnership and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of their cultural resources and homelands. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. We honor and are grateful for the land we occupy and recognize the ongoing damage of settler colonialism. Let's take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds that we are collectively gathered upon and support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown worldwide. I am on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay peoples. I encourage you to name and acknowledge the Native peoples where you are located in the chat box. And there's also a link to look that up in the chat box. On behalf of the program committee, I'd like to welcome you all to this ReMuseum program. Recover, reimagine, revive. What does ReMuseum mean to you? Thank you for joining this virtual conversation to delve deeply into the challenges that the museum field is currently facing and how our field can move forward. In this series, members of the program committee are in dialogue with special guests who have knowledge or experience to help us consider new perspectives or explore new directions for our field. Let me remind you that CAM has a board-approved code of conduct for participation in our programs. A link was sent to you in the confirmation for this program, but Lacey is also going to paste a link in the chat box for your convenience. CAM is committed to providing a safe, inclusive, and respectful learning and networking experience for everyone. So I'd like to introduce our program committee member who will lead today's discussion, Sue Lafferty. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everybody here, and thank you very much for coming. I think this is the topic that is first and foremost on many of our minds during these extremely challenging times. We have faced something that I think none of us have ever experienced before, both personally and professionally. And the word pivot is something that I hear over and over and over again. It really has, it's like the word of the year. We've all really had to change the way we do things. And in particular, making sure that our donors are feeling engaged and that the stewardship continues, and that we make sure that they feel like their support is worthwhile and that we still continue to serve our communities as is our mission states. So what we're going to talk about today with our esteemed colleagues, Randy Shulman, who is the Director of Advancement and Community Engagement at the Huntington Library, Art Museums, and Botanical Gardens, and with Doug Jenzen, who is the Director of Membership and Community and Visitor Services at Lotusland, recently just at Lotusland. Congratulations again, Doug. But for the past 10 years, he was at the Dune Center. So he'll mostly be talking about his experience at the Dune Center, but I think also, Doug, it'll be interesting to see how you're thinking about going forward with the Lotusland programs as well. So we're going to have a nice conversation here. I hope that it's going to be very helpful. We're going to touch on a lot of things. I have some questions that I'll be asking. What we would ask of all of you is that as questions come to mind, feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. We will have a Q&A during the last 15 minutes of the session, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all of your questions. So keep your thoughts and your ideas and your questions coming, and we'll have a chance to engage with all of you towards the end. So without further ado, I want to ask Randy and Doug to go ahead and take a couple of minutes to just give sort of a self-introduction and also talk a little bit about what they've had first and foremost in mind during the pandemic and how they've been managing with fundraising at their respective institutions. So how about if we start with Randy?
Okay, thanks, Sue. Good to see everybody. I'm glad to be here with you. And I want to tell you that today is the first time that I've ever experienced a land acknowledgement. And it was very moving, and I'm so honored to have watched it in action. So thanks for the opportunity. Okay, turning to COVID in 2020. So all of you have programs that rely on earned revenue and membership, I think, and in one form or another. And one of the things about 2020 is that there is no rule book, as you know. There is no guide, there is no rule book, except our onboard wisdom and our common sense about working with individuals and the relationships. And we have tested that sorely this year, and how to figure out how to resonate with our community, but also understand that there's great need in the community, and that each organization, while they're important, we weren't first responders. We weren't feeding hungry people. We were not, and I've had great consternation about how to be a fundraiser when your organization was probably going to survive, and that the person sitting next to you would be in an organization that may not, and how to continue to want to support your place that, you know, where you have to raise money and bring support and interest, but at the other side, having greater concern about the community. And so there are a couple of things that I'd like to tell you that we experienced. And one is that people who know us and know what we do wanted to make sure that we were okay. And that was a very, very heartening thing, that people sometimes in the membership world especially can be transactional, and they don't tend to be transactional until they are. So there are many, many thousands of people that we talk to who are happy and, you know, want to support us until you're closed for 2.5 months or 3 months, and then what? So we thought about it very deeply, and very, you know, all of my colleagues together, it's a very good group to use as a springboard. And what did we decide the number 1, 2, and 3 guiding rules would be? One is to be in touch with people. We made thousands of phone calls to our donors, and some of them were board members and the higher level donors, but many were just the individual members who we started to divide up the list and started to call people, because we just wanted to know we're here, and we're going to be here again when things change and people can come back in person. The other thing is that we realized that our organization does a lot of internal assessment. Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? Are we figuring things out? And what were our donors and our leadership thinking about? How can you take your organization and have external value? Should we be, you know, what are we doing for other communities right now that have even greater need? And an example of that is, you know, our education programs that the Huntington creates curriculum for, and many programs that people come in person. Well, we tripled our efforts to do online things that would help teachers and students who are at home, because that we could do. We could offer meaningful content. And so we sped up and expanded that. But the truth is that on a very personal level, the one main lesson is that people wanted to do something in the spring and the summer, and even now. I just want to do something that's helpful, no matter what it is. So when I wrote to major donors to ask them to continue their annual donations in the spring, one of them I wrote on the 23rd of March. And I was looking at the stock market, you know, on my computer screen as I was getting ready to have this conversation. And I realized this person would not be in the same frame of mind that they would be in at any other time. And I had to decide, what do we do? Do we ask? Do we not ask? And when I talked to him, he said, you need to ask. Don't worry about me. I want to help you. Just tell me what's going on. I just want to know, is your organization, you know, are you doing everything you can? Are you keeping people safe? Are you planning for when you have another paradigm, when you reopen? And so that gave me the strength to continue to ask people. And of the people we asked, almost everybody said yes. And there were people that said, well, now I need to concentrate on other organizations too. That's fine. But they did want to be asked. And so that was an interesting lesson, to not I was going to shy away and say, you know what, why don't we wait a few months? But we couldn't. And I was glad to get feedback from people that said, you know, I'm glad you asked because I want to do something helpful. Okay, so that's my opening. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to talk to you now, or we can wait till the end as well.
Interesting, Randy. I think that don't be afraid to ask. Advice is very, very good. I think a lot of us shied away thinking that now is just not a bad time. But what I saw were, and myself included, I tended to give more than I generally did because I knew that organizations were greatly in need. And now was the time to jump in. Doug, do you want to go ahead and take a couple minutes and talk about what you did at the Dune Center and what you think you'll be doing at Lotusland?
Yeah, so when the closure first happened in March, my cell phone it was just constantly ringing, whether it was from staff, board members, and donors. And everybody was kind of running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And I kept finding myself referring back to past experiences. As a society, we've been through a lot over the last 20 years. You think in terms of like 9/11 and what that did to all of us, and then the recession and what that did to all of us. And at one point in my past life, I worked in retail management, and I was at the helm of a ship when 9/11 happened. And I remembered when Williams-Sonoma actually sold out of roasting pans when 9/11 happened because people needed to nest at home. And so when the lockdown first happened, I thought, well, what are people going to need? What is that roasting pan going to be for the pandemic? And I heard from friends saying, I don't know how to talk to my kids about this virus. And so I was like, okay, so people need things they can do at home. They need things that they can do with their kids. We need to support our families. And one of the very first, and it was one of those random thoughts I had in a shower one morning, was like, what if we created a COVID-19 time capsule as a way to give families something to do? And the Dune Center was never great at social media, but I immediately fell back to like, okay, let's use social media to disseminate this. We can use our traditional e-marketing ideas. And so I created this kind of informal e-blast that said, you know, we're here for you. And also at that point, every single email I had gotten in my inbox had a link to the CDC website. So I was like, okay, people don't need one more link to the CDC website. They need something useful that they can do at home while their kids are trapped in the living room with them. And so I sent out this kind of funny e-blast that was like, here's a COVID-19 time capsule, and also a link to a New York Times article about how to build a COVID-19 piñata model that you could then beat up with your kids. And because I really felt like people needed a sense of levity, and that just, you know, it was my gut to go that direction, and it turned out to be right because money started pouring in more than we had ever seen before from a very passive campaign like an e-blast. And so at that point, we kind of looked internally, and we had board meetings, and the question was like, is now a good time to ask for money, like Randy said? And I'm like, yeah, people are looking for a way to help. We have checks coming in like we've never had before. Without it, it wasn't even a concerted effort, but it worked. And so I think what it comes down to is figuring out what people need and what's relevant at a particular time, being nimble enough to maneuver, which I think small museums have that going for them. But then I also think that COVID highlighted some of the the cracks in organizations that didn't have everything smoothed out, and it made it more, more difficult to maneuver this. But yeah, a lot of it was figuring out what the community needs and what families need and supporting them.
Relevant, it sounds like. And Randy, I think you made a really good point, which was that you kind of set the foundation for this already by making sure that your donors and your members really had an intimate understanding of what the Huntington actually does. And you talked about transactional. So you had already made sure that they're fully aware that there are outstanding programs, that you're in the community making a difference. You've got these amazing collections and so on. So it sounds like just in the lead into this, even though it was totally unexpected, in a lot of ways you were kind of ready because your folks already knew what you do.
Well, it's hard though,
it is.
because we were in our centennial year at the same time.
Mhm.
So we had ramped up all of this programmatic, just, we were all moving at light speed, trying to do things. And then it all came to a stop about 2/3 of the way through that celebration. So there were a lot of things that we had to stop and not do.
Mhm.
So, but people were paying attention. And so luckily we had started the year so strong that we had some momentum to help carry us. And we needed a lot of goodwill because people, what we find is that when people show up in person, they're reflecting their mindset of where they are as part of society. And people are broken and very on edge for all the different reasons that 2020 brought us. And they're coming in person with that as we've reopened in July when we reopened. And watching that, even if you tell them stuff, you have to do it differently. You have to talk to them. We're not sending stuff in the mail anymore either. Everything's digital. So just segmenting the communication as much as we can and talking to them where they are. And we no longer have a beautiful glossy 18-page thing that we mail out every 2 months to them. If we're going to give them information, we've got to find other ways. And nothing is perfect. Everything is, it takes work and it takes adjustments. And so that's what we've been doing. But really, I think people's ability to receive is different now. And in some ways, because some people have been home, they actually have time to talk to us and read things that they never did before.
Mhm.
And one of the phone calls, there were 2 phone calls I want to share with you. One is where somebody said, I've had more experience with you in the last 3 months over the summer than I have in the last 3 years.
Mm.
Because I'm hard of hearing and I could never go to any of your programs and actually hear anything. And with all of this content that you're putting out there that's on Zoom, I can turn up the volume or do whatever I have to do, and I can actually take part in it now. And then the other story was somebody who had just, they pick up the phone and they answer very curt because who calls on the phone anymore? Well, now we do, but this was in April. And the person said, I just lost my partner of 18 years. And before they hung up the phone, they said, by the way, where are you calling from? Huntington. Oh, that was our special place to go together. And you get that place open again because I need to come back there and heal from this loss. And that's our place. So, and the staff, this reverberates through the staff, and all of a sudden, these are not just phone calls anymore. They
Mhm.
take on a much different value. And so, yeah, that's the.
So that kind of resonates with what Doug was saying too, is that you really reached out and met people where they were, where they are. One thing I've been thinking about is this has gone on for so long, much longer than we ever expected. And I think initially there was this response that, yes, I want to help. We're all in this together. People are tired now, and you see that. Are you seeing that your donors and your members are starting to get a little frustrated? The museums are now closed again. And they're just kind of getting tired. And also, people are starting to feel the long-term effects financially. So are you seeing a change now over this 9 months in your donors' response to their support for your respective institutions? Doug, I know you've only been at Lotusland for a short time, but did you see that at the Dune and with kids going back to school? And
So no. And I think a lot of it is, it comes back to that being nimble and agile, because when, for me, it was always thinking what's next? What are people going to need next? And typically the Dune Center runs a summer program about oceanography for kids. The Dune Center's main constituents are 3rd through 5th grade students. And without them being able to go to those Boys and Girls Clubs or the YMCAs where we typically disseminate those programs, we needed to figure out how to get it online. And so I reached out to our traditional partners, in addition to the United Way of Santa Barbara County. And I said, you know, we have these pre-packaged programs that I think we could modify if you guys could figure out how to distribute the supplies. And so the United Way ended up doing weekly parent pickup for science supplies that we would then deliver programs and do the activities with the kids on Zoom. And I think that's actually why the fundraise, the income never dropped off, was because we were always doing something. We were always ahead of the curve. You know, we actually, when school started this fall, the Dune Center had more experience teaching online lessons than actual teachers did. So then teachers started coming to us to figure out how to teach science activities on Zoom. And all of this comes back to that relevance component of, I was able to send out an e-blast every couple of weeks with an update on, this is what we're doing, and it just never stopped. I think the difficult part of it was, you know, furloughing half the staff at such a small organization and never being able to kind of take time out for myself to figure out where I'm fitting into the pandemic, because it was always go, 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 go. And eventually I did take a couple days off, but as far as what the public and the donors and members saw, it was pretty seamless.
And how did you communicate what you were doing with the schools and with the families to your donors?
From the start, from the beginning of my time with the Dune Center, I was always growing this list of contacts in our email distribution software. And it was everything from anytime I saw somebody write, you know, a writer for the newspaper, write a story related to anything we do, I would enter them into the, you know, they'd get our e-blast. All of our donors got the e-blast. And so prior to COVID, I had this very comprehensive communication distribution list that I tapped into to distribute all of this. And you know, everyone from the Chamber of Commerce that usually posts events or business happenings, they started posting our activities online because they heard about it through an email. The city's Park and Recs department, they couldn't have people doing, you know, soccer in parks. And so they started sending out the Dune Center's activities that we were posting every day. And so I think a lot of it had to do with the infrastructure we had in place prior to COVID that we were able to tap into.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to pivot over to foundations and other funding organizations. We've kind of been focusing on individual donors, but I know a lot of foundations, at least down here, for example, in San Diego, the San Diego Foundation has really focused their funding this year on getting kids online and some of the other things that are directly related to the COVID pandemic and supporting families. And how have the two of you approached grant writing and trying to, again, this relevance thing, when foundations are moving more toward keeping people fed and keeping people housed, and how do you make your case to keep them engaged in your organizations and in giving to your organizations, given what the more urgent needs are. Randy, do you want to?
Well, I think we've had to be very mindful of that because we did not want to stand ahead of organizations that, like, as I mentioned earlier. On the other hand, we did have a responsibility, you know, when we thought about the paycheck protection, the PPP loans, and also things from IMLS and NEA and NEH, we had to decide, you know, should we be in these queues and does it make sense? And sometimes we did and sometimes we didn't. And we were able to get one important IMLS grant that was not, it was authorized by the CARES Act, but it was to train docents how to do accessible and, you know, to work with DEI topics and to be better docents, something I know you would have loved us to get. But as far as general support, many of the foundations have said to us, just use the money where you need it. You don't have to write a report this year. So this is where we had a relationship and we actually had a grant. But I think we've been very mindful not to stand in front when there's a homeless shelter or when there's a million other, depending on who the donor is. We're really mindful of that. You know, what we did not go out and just blanket every possible place to see if we could raise $1. That wasn't our intent ever. But I just want to go back to your earlier question because I didn't get a chance to mention my answer, which was we have about 800 people a week now that call us to talk to us on the phone because they're booking tickets and reservations to visit the Huntington. So the Huntington has been open to people coming onto the gardens since the middle of June, and we hope that will continue. But that has given us some relief, whereas many of you who are, if you're just a gallery that has walls and a door and you can't have people inside, you know, you're really in a different position. But people have tried to come back to us and we have very limited capacity, only 1/3 of capacity. And so that's been an interesting dance, is how to keep people happy who are used to being able to make a modest donation and kind of have the run of your place whenever they want, and they don't now. So we've had to deal with the rising anger on top of everything else. It's that I just want to come and, you know, I want tickets. I can't get them. And even with equity issues, people who are members will write, you know, I can't get a ticket for today, but if I wanted to buy a ticket, I could get one. And, you know, the truth is that 2/3 of the tickets are for members, and we want to protect our public accessibility. So we're not going to eat into that. Anyway, it's been a very interesting dance. But it's a new thing for us to deal with that level of frustration and that level, because, you know, on one hand, they love you. And on the other hand, they're very disappointed. Yeah. So it's been difficult. Okay, so going to your latter question. There are some donors, though, that we have been told, that have told us, sit it out for a year. We're going to we're going to go to immediate emergency grants, period. And we respect that very much.
Yeah. Doug, how about you? Have you seen?
It's kind of a big question because so the Dune Center straddles San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties. And so up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was able to tap into the foundation funding available in both counties. And then I believe it was December 2018, the fire and debris flow happened outside of Santa Barbara, and a lot of the county's typical foundations started funding basic needs back then. And so it wasn't a huge loss when they said, oh, we're going to continue to just focus on basic needs for COVID as well. On the other hand, the foundations based in San Luis Obispo County are funding the Dune Center at levels that we've never seen before, even though the building is in Santa Barbara County. Because we work with San Luis County residents, they've been very helpful. So I guess the short answer is it's kind of a mixed bag.
Sure. Yep. So we've got some questions coming in, and I thought we'd take a few. The first one is from David Burton, and this is in regards to, this is a question for Randy. you talked about some of the examples, a hearing impaired individual, the individual who had lost their loved one in the stock market. They are interested in, or David is interested in what their level of giving is and their membership level. And also, do you and your staff make calls to members and donors at the lower levels, and did they respond with comparable generosity? Good question.
Very good question. Well, okay, so the examples I gave you, so the example of the person who lost their partner was a what we call a supporting member, actually sustaining. So it's a basic level member. So we divided our staff up, and we have about 600 people at the upper end that the Society of Fellows, it's called, and they have their own staff. They have 2 people, so they were able to handle those calls. The larger group, we had 45,000 members in March, family memberships. So we divided up, and we did not start, we did some work at the top, but we really just started with the big pile of general members. And we were very, so you're asking me about the hearing impaired person. That person's a former chair of our board. So they're at the highest level, and in that case, but there are many other examples. And so again, we tried not to just focus at the top, because part of getting people to continue their involvement is to make sure you catch them. And you can't just do that by the top 2%. And we don't want to, we want everybody. And so luckily our membership office and visitor services, because we were closed and couldn't do the normal on-site work at all, we had more people to deploy and to do that. Now, since we've reopened, there are still staff in advancement who don't normally work in membership and visitor services, who are still answering those calls. And we now have a new system to route and prioritize and to segment out the calls. So we're not doing the how are you doing calls now. Now we're doing the responsive, that you're upset about something, or and also there are people who call that just want to renew their membership. So we want to make sure we handle that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was one of the comments I was going to make in general. It's not just as it is during good and bad times. You want to support your current donors, but there's always the need to bring in new people as well. So, okay, so the next question is from Chris Lutz, who is with the Huntington still, I believe. Yeah.
Still, we have a deal.
Yes. Hi, Sue.
Your question is a very good one. So it's going beyond COVID, because this has been such an eventful year. One of the big issues, of course, has been how our organizations can focus on DEI and during, as you say, the current reckoning regarding social justice and inclusion. So how do we adjust our fundraising to address those issues as well? And I think that's such a good question, Chris. Thanks for bringing it up. So Doug, you want to start, and then Randy will have you comment as well.
I feel like that's another really big question that you could probably spend days talking about. One of the things, and this is kind of a personal pet peeve, there's a lot of emphasis on growing diversity in the museum world, especially when it comes to boards and upper management. But there's not been a lot of effort into giving people the tools they need to be successful. Sometimes it feels like, people just want diversity for the sake of diversity instead of actually success or setting people up for success. And so, and this isn't an issue that the Dune Center has ever really had to grapple with, because it's in a community where 85% of the population is Latino. Right now, there's only one Caucasian on the board. And so I'm coming at it from the perspective of, okay, so we have this diverse organization already. What's next? And so that's kind of where the Dune Center is with DEI. And as far as that, relates to fundraising, it's probably one of the reasons the organization is big into grassroots fundraising rather than having your more traditional board setup where you have wealthy board members who contribute a lot, or they have their wealthy friends. Not to say those things can't overlap, but again, I haven't really seen a big effort in the museum world to actually give people the tools they need to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And Randy, I know the Huntington's been looking at this for quite some time.
Well, this is a tough question because on one hand, we want to reflect the community that we serve. And, having to make up for lots of lost time as a Eurocentric, the founding organization was a very Eurocentric, and our founder himself was the largest property developer in Los Angeles. And if you study him, he's a lovely person who left us his legacy. But among the housing subdivisions that he built, they carried the restrictions of the day that people. So that's something that people are going to study and talk about more and more. And the organization will evolve as we become more open about this. Everything up until about 5 years ago was very much adoration, and now it's honest questioning, and I think that's very healthy. So as we get into a larger conversation, other people emerge, which will represent good leadership material for the boards and things like that. So I'm very hopeful. But when I look at our visitorship, I asked to have a little experiment, which is that we studied everybody who came the first 8 days of November. And November is normally the slowest time of the year, but because people are home more and they need something to do, it's not slow. So we looked, and 59% of the people that bought a ticket were first-time visitors. 59%, that's incredible. And when we look at the zip codes of where people live, they're far. You could be in 5 different counties in those zip codes. I mean, it's amazing. So I think that the Huntington, really, it's a question of having the collections at the Huntington and the people who work at the Huntington reflect the communities, and people will see people who look like them and who have interesting content that's of interest to them, aside from the traditional, older European art collection and things like that. I want to tell you an interesting thing, that epiphany that happened. The Huntington hired a curator of American art who's now been with us probably a year and a half. But earlier this year, we had a conversation, and he said, now, we have this American art collection. You do realize that American art includes Latin American art. And I stopped and I said, nobody's ever mentioned that before. The Huntington has collected colonial art and, art appropriating Native Americans, having photos and images of Native Americans, things. But nobody's ever mentioned Latin American art. And it's fantastic because it opens up an incredible vista that I didn't know was available to us. So, we are learning, and we have our eyes and our hearts open for, being that kind of place. I don't even know if I answered the question.
Well, I think one of the things that always delighted me, I was at the Huntington for a long time, but as the curator started to look deeper into the collections and to think about them differently, particularly in the library, there really was a lot of material that was relevant to the Latino community, the Latinx community, and the African American or Black community. And the Huntington really started to make a huge effort to pull those out and make them more visible and highlight them, to really show that there are things there, they're hidden, and we're trying, you were trying to bring them out into the open, but there are things that are meaningful to more diverse audience than you would think just looking at the Huntington from outside the gates, I guess.
True. Well, and also because I can bring out of the basement, I can bring you the pamphlets that were written about the Asian communities of California in the 1880s, these horrible, racist, awful things that people were writing and distributing. And then I can put that away, and I can bring you Octavia Butler's books when she was getting ready to write her books and her prep. And I can pull that back, and I can bring you the first Chinese Americans to pass the bar in California, both in San Francisco and LA. I can put that away, and I can bring you somebody else's collection who is a labor organizer who's still living in the LAUSD realm of politics. And that's not normally what you think of when you think of us. You think of Shakespeare.
Mhm.
No, it's not.
And buildings with big white columns.
Exactly. I see a question from Celeste about leveraging an increase in virtual programs. It's a very key question, because we have increased, but the problem is that there's so much stuff out there that people can't find it all now. It's like there's too much for people to be able to find and prioritize. And so we are trying to figure out, number one, we're focusing really on educational groups and making sure that we have, years ago, the Huntington found out that people were studying the California Gold Rush in North Carolina using curriculum developed at the Huntington with an NEH grant. That was great, but it was one thing we found out about. Now we find out that there are schools in other states who are using our stuff because they don't have to come to the Huntington anymore to participate. We deliver it to them, and we'll even talk to them about it at a distance. So it's leveraging it that's one way of leveraging it. The other thing is for our public audiences is to just make sure that everything we're doing is captured. So imagine all the lectures over the million years of the hundreds of lectures that we provided for the public that were never recorded, never kept on any kind of searchable media. And now all of that is, and so that everything we do will have a life beyond.
I think when you turn that around and look at your donors and foundations who want to give to the Huntington, and you talk about how much broader your reach is because of the increase in using the in virtual programming, they really get a lot of bang for their buck. That's a huge selling point I think that you can use, is that it's not just the local schools now, it's schools from all over the state, all over the country, potentially even, going international. There are some things there that, someone in another country would be interested in,
Right.
about American history or literature or gardens. So
I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a quick story if I can.
Okay.
When we started our centennial, our president, who was very, very, very deeply enmeshed in making the accessibility and the relevance of the Huntington enhanced, she said, give me some ideas for how we can, work with college age students who may or may not have time to come to the Huntington, or price might be a barrier. So we came up with one idea, which is funded by a grant that we already had. We gave 100 memberships away to college students around the LA region. And we did that a year ago. So we were really pleased with ourselves because we were able to give these memberships away, and they flew off the shelves in about 20 seconds, being, announced on social media. And then we never followed up with anybody. We never talked to anybody. We never monitored who actually, only about 80% of them activated their membership. The other 20% had just disappeared. But when we got around to COVID and we said, what else can we do? We said, let's do it again, but this time let's do it differently. So this time we gave the memberships away. But in order to get one, you had to talk about what you do as an individual in your own community. And you had to tell us about how you work with things in bettering your own community. And not everybody wants to write that. Not everybody wants to go through that. So this time we offered 500 memberships. And in less than a day, they were all, we had much more than 500 who asked. And then the staff had to go through and read these submissions and pick people. And some of it is at random because you can't read all 500 of them. But when we started to listen to we started to read what people were writing, it's the most amazing stories of people. And it's so heartening because these are the people who don't make the time to go to cultural organizations when they're busy. They're trying to work and study. And, there's lots and lots of community colleges. There's lots of people with great stories. And we made some friends. We made friends with people who will now value what we do and want to talk about, how to be involved. So again, it's easy when you're giving it away. By the way, this cost was covered by a gift. So, the people wanted us to do something like this. But it was one way of trying to leverage the time that we had more time to think about how to deal with. And now we will reach out to each one of these people and we keep talking to them over the course of the year of their membership.
Yeah, I would think it would be very interesting to do follow-up with all of them to see how they use their membership and how it changed their lives in some way or helped them with school. And that's good stuff for donors as well. So we've got a couple other questions that have come in, and this one goes back to new donors during COVID and our other challenges that we're facing. Doug, let's start with you. Did you make an effort to acquire new donors, or have you been, and how has that worked?
The short answer is no. I was more focused on making sure our existing donors were okay and checking in on them. I did do kind of this funny, I turned 40 in April. And so one of my like weekly check-ins with everybody on our email distribution list, I said, hey, you know, please donate $40 to the Dune Center for my 40th birthday. And we ended up with a ton of new donors that way, because $40 is something that, you know, you don't have to think twice about it. So I mean, in a funny way, we did get new donors, but it wasn't like an emphasis or concerted effort.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Randy, how about, and I love that idea, $40 for your 40th birthday. That's great. Randy, how about the Huntington?
It's tough. It's tough. Our great skill is seeing people in person. When people come to the Huntington, for those of you who've been to the Huntington in normal times, you see a table with a tablecloth and a bright staff member who wants to engage with you and talk about your visit and sell you a membership and sell you a higher level membership or renew your membership. And that's different now. And we went from a 3% conversion rate for visitors to a 0.25% conversion rate. That's a disaster. But online, the conversion rate went way up because everything is done electronically. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we did is that when you buy a ticket to visit the Huntington, the day of your visit, after you visited, you get an email from our director of membership that says, I hope you enjoyed your visit. We'd love for you to come back again. Why don't you apply what you paid today to a membership? And by the way, here's a survey so you can tell us what you thought of your visit and where you spent your time. Mm-hmm. And awesome. We've sold 75,000 memberships, $75,000 worth of memberships in 2 months doing that, which ordinarily would be a higher number, but this is a very big help for us. Now, as far as our major donor community, we are still making relationships that start at zero with people during this time, where people tell us about somebody they know. And here's a quick example. I had 3 times in the last week where I was supposed to go into work and be there and meet somebody outside at a distance, walk around with them at a distance, get to know them. All 3 were postponed because as the week has progressed, people have gotten more nervous. Mm-hmm. But that's the problem, is that each time, each of these weeks that we've had, something has come up. We had the fires, we had terrible situations with air quality, we had extreme heat down here. And so between the beginning of COVID and now, it's been one thing after another. And you know, we're still trying, but it's not that easy. We had a big gala that we would have had an annual gala every September. We didn't have it, and we're probably not going to have it. So there are times where people would invite their friends with the tickets they get for being a sponsor, and those people didn't come. So, you know, again, there are. I mean, Chris, who is our Plan Giving director, she's still sending out newsletters, and you know, so you can. Here it is. And you know what? It's one of the only things that has come in the mail from the Huntington in 7 months. And this was such a welcome thing because it talks about what other people have been doing at the Huntington and a little bit of news about how you can make gifts because of this year with tax deductibility being more beneficial this year. These kinds of things are hugely valuable because people have time, they're captive audience. So that's how we're trying to do that. And I don't know, you know, each day that goes by, 2 or 3 people call and say, I got this, I want to talk to you about leaving something in my estate. Mm-hmm. So that's how we're doing it. It's different. Our president isn't able to make the kind of new relationships, but if she was going to the LA Chamber of Commerce and meeting people and inviting them over, she's not doing either or now. So that's really tough.
So Cornelia Emerson has asked about the Chinese community in the San Gabriel Valley. And so that will be directed to you, Randy, obviously, but how have you engaged with the Chinese community? They've become an extremely important audience for the Huntington, which is appropriate. And your backdrop is the fantastic new area of the Chinese garden, and the Chinese garden is now completed, and that is in large part due to the generosity of the Chinese community. So I guess I'll go ahead and put some context onto Cornelia's question, which is, have you seen any change? Have you changed the way that you engage with the Chinese community during this time, or has that kind of stayed steady?
Well, there's a bigger issue with the Chinese community, which is that the Chinese community is not monolithic. And there are so many different facets. You know, when we started talking about, by the way, anybody who thinks that the Huntington built a Chinese garden because there was a growing Chinese community around us, they're mistaken. The snowball of the effort to build the garden started years earlier, and built and built and built. And by incredible serendipity, there was a community around us who felt very strongly about wanting to honor Chinese history and culture and have a bridge to Western culture. But it wasn't why we built the garden, and the garden was able to benefit. But we made every mistake in the book trying to engage new audiences. Remember, when the Huntington started to talk to the Chinese American community, and what is the Chinese American community? Taiwan, Hong Kong, Suzhou, not Suzhou, you know, and there's 56 ethnic groups in China, and I've met somebody from every single one of them. The thing is that people realized that this was a great symbol of friendship between cultures, and for that it worked. But many of the gifts to the Chinese garden are not very repeatable at the Huntington because they were in honor of somebody's family or for a particular reason. And our real mission after they get involved is to keep them involved and to love the whole Huntington and that in some cases has been spectacularly successful, and in many cases it is not. Because first of all, we're talking about hundreds of families, but also there are some people that we never see. I don't know if any of you have anybody that's given $1 million to your organization that you've never met, but we have people like that. Not very many, but the thing is that it was peer-to-peer fundraising, where somebody said to their group that they're very friendly with, we're going to do something, we want you each to do something. And it happened over and over and over again in different social circles where people said, I'm in. And I would come back from lunch one day to the office and there'd be a person standing in the hallway and, you know, hi, nice to meet you. Yes, I've got a check for $50,000 I'm bringing you. We've never met this person. We've never even started a relationship. So the key is not getting the money, it's keeping the relationship. And so that's what we've been working on. And I think that we have only one person in our office who's a native Chinese speaker, and she works 24 hours a day and she's incredible. But we have all tried to understand how to keep this door open, because there's a lot of pride in the fact that this is now the largest Chinese garden in the world outside of China. And when the Chinese officials come to visit, they will say things like, well, you know, this is the nicest garden of any of the gardens. And the reason they'll say that is because their gardens have had 50,000 people a week with very little breath for the garden to rest and to be restored. And ours is new. So, you know, you know, and also I see Cornelia's mentioning, yes, the philanthropic tradition within different communities is different, and we know that. But on the other hand, this is the interesting thing. This is the first group of people coming in large numbers as new Americans who came with money. And that's it's a different dynamic, because my family came here and they had not a dime when they came here, and they had to decide, you know, how to handle being in a new place. But we have people that arrive with some discretion to make gifts and to be civically active. And so that's been an interesting, you know, where they sometimes have an agenda to show people that they are wanting to be American and wanting to be of the community. And so it is definitely never monolithic. And we used to talk about the Asian community, and that doesn't work either. So we've learned a lot. We've made many, there's a book that can be written by one of our colleagues who's now retired, Susie Moser, of every mistake we ever made to build credibility within the Chinese community. And really, you know, doing things from the heart is helpful, but there is still, we have done many things where we had white orchids at an event, which ordinarily might signify a funeral, and it wasn't a funeral. You know, so there's lots for us as an organization to understand and to better work with the, you know, it's just, you know, but again, I've made the mistakes. We've designed a donor wall that they said, no, that looks like a cemetery. You can't do that. Okay. Okay. So anyway, that's the riddle of trying to, and there is one member of a community that became a board member who said to me, I might be Chinese, but I like the desert garden. I'm not into the Chinese garden. Don't look at me that way. So.
Lots of lessons to be learned from that. Well, we have about 1 minute left, but I'm hoping we can go 1 minute over to give our two speakers a chance to just give us very quickly, three takeaways that you would leave our participants with as we go forward, and advice in fundraising. We're still in the middle of all of this, and what are your most important things that you would send them away with as tips to succeed in fundraising? Doug, do you want to start?
Yeah, and I basically have one tip, which is stay connected. Everybody is feeling isolated right now, and so nobody minds a phone call in the middle of the day anymore, or during dinner, checking on each other. But also things like, and this goes back to Celeste's questions about leveraging programs, is if you have families who are doing your virtual programs, check in on them. And my top tip with that is see if you can get photos from them, because the great thing about our virtual programs right now and putting things on social media and YouTube, you actually have something to show your donors. So get those pictures of those kids doing the experiments in their backyard.
Great suggestion. Randy.
I just have one, is to build on Doug's really good suggestion, which is that people want to know what you're up to. They want to know they want to know about your work, and they want to know what successes you're having despite the challenges. Yeah. So tell them the good news too. They always wanted good news, but now they really need it.
Yeah, great. This has been terrific, and everyone, I hope it's been helpful for you. I know Randy and Doug would probably be open to being contacted directly. I hope that's okay if I throw that out there. If any of you have any questions, they're both terrific and always very helpful. So Doug and Randy, thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate it. And
my pleasure.
And everybody take care and stay safe.
Great.
And hang in there.
Yeah. I'm just going to share a couple things as we wrap up. Sue, thank you so much for bringing this session to CAM and to the ReMuseum series. I mean, fundraising is, and as you mentioned, top of mind for everybody, in every part of our field. And then thank you so much for Doug, to Doug and Randy. What you shared, your personal experiences, your examples, I think are all really wonderful takeaways. And so thank you also to all the participants. You will be receiving a survey, and we really want to hear from you. So please take the couple minutes it will take to fill out our simple survey. And so that helps us to improve our program. Next week is Thanksgiving, so we are taking a break from ReMuseum, but the following week, December 3rd, we will be back again at noon. And that talk will feature a couple of speakers on DEAI in action. So please don't miss that session, and thank you again, everyone.